From Acts 17:24. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath, and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history, and the boundaries of their lands. And I think it's interesting. I've actually heard this verse used by people to support, on one hand, a multiracial society, and for others, segregation. Though the people who support a multiracial argument for this verse just ignore the rest of the verse. It's only the beginning for them. It's using this one man or one blood for all nations, or in Wycliffe it's all the kind of men, which we can understand as all races coming from one. Some then use it for statements like the one race or the human race, and for me that's pretty immediately a useless phrase. It goes against science on race, your experiences in everyday life, and it completely ignores the rest of the verse. If it's all the kind of men, then we still have unique kinds of people, or even all unique nations in other translations, regardless of a shared origin in the distant past. And then we have the bounds of their habitation, or boundaries of their lands. So even in this verse, even right here, it's made clear God still wants boundaries between different nations or different kinds of people, which can be certainly understood as racial boundaries, natural boundaries determined by God, and that's more of what the segregationist argument was. Let's keep in mind for here too that we're now in the New Testament. This is after the life of Jesus, so even after that, we're reconfirming the importance of different people, nations, and boundaries for people in their lands, just as we read with all of that consideration of ethnic and national boundaries within the Old Testament. Also, this is written for all the nations of the earth, so we're applying boundaries far beyond the tribes of Israel. I also like that there's references for the times of these nations appointed in history. So there it's acknowledging that the boundaries change over time. And certainly if national boundaries form naturally as a function of history, and historically people with shared cultures, languages, and race do form these nations, exactly as we're told that they do it in the Bible, it makes sense that nations and their boundaries depend primarily on the people that might be there. Now, I promised you that I would be completing this type of cycle, and here's the completion. We start with the Tower of Babel as separating all people who work together in violation of God's particular will there. And here we are at the end of the Bible, reading how the bringing back together of people on earth is actually more of a trick. Revelations 13:5. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God, and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. Here I just want to highlight that it's blasphemy against those who live in or dwell in heaven. We'll cover who dwells in heaven in particular soon, in contrast to these verses taking place on earth. Revelations 13:7. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Highlighting here, it's made clear that authority is given over all races and all nations, using all lineages or tribe depending on translation, and also saying all languages. The inclusion of all languages too reminds me pretty immediately of the Tower of Babel. Ultimately, this is the reunification of all races and languages of people on earth regardless of nation. And it's not just a bad thing here, but it's actually the work of the beast. Also, this is a peace through war and conquest. This is a forced unification in violation of the boundaries that God determines and guides. Can we then really expect anything else when we force diversity? For what exactly? So that we feel better? It's not good for the common people, but it is good for the government. And for you, direct question. How often does the idea of having a diverse nation make you feel proud? Does it make you feel like you're better than others? In the Bible, proud words. There's that trick. You as a Christian were never asked to make a nation through bringing all people of the world together into one. Revelations 13:8. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Highlighting here, it's all inhabitants of the earth, so we're again being clear that it's everyone everywhere, and could therefore be considered a one-world government. Thinking back to how people used to think of it, let's look at a more historical interpretation. From Hans Bergkammer, the beast is thought of as a seven-headed creature with horns and crowns, representing the rulers or power of many nations combined into one. Also note now, the heads are not the same, coming from different animals and being brought together into a natural whole. Its existence is evocative in it being in violation of this biological natural law. In modern times, we would likely look for something that doesn't look like this, but the symbols that we look for endure still, as well as the sentiment. The unnatural bringing together of diverse nature is still something that threatens us when we think about this one world government concept.
When we see the explosion of all the marginal identities, the explosion of the recognition of all these marginal identities, what we're seeing is the process of something like this notion of 666. And you see it not just in that sense, but in the sense that, for example, you could account for consciousness completely. An image of this, of course, is in the vision of artificial intelligence. And so it's interesting because there are a lot of these things kind of swirling around today, which can help us understand the problem of 666. I know many of you have probably seen the speech that Tim Cook gave to the ADL, the CEO of Apple. If you have not seen it, it is very much worth your time to watch it, because what he himself wants to portray himself as embodying these marginal identities. And then what he talks about is the creation of an artificial intelligence, which he literally, I can't use that word anymore, which he describes as the God out of the machine. And that we have to create this God out of a machine, and this God out of the machine will solve our problem, the problem of hate speech, the problem of hate in general, the problem of excluding these marginal identities. And so he wants to account for everything. And he believes that he can create an image of man, and that he somehow believes that he will be able to breathe life into it so that it becomes this consciousness, and that this consciousness will then be put up above us as an authority and will decide for us, who is excluded and who is included, and in the desire to actually include all the margin.
And as Christians, it is common enough to see this and to push back against the idea of governments ever expanding their power and control. But if Christians don't push against the forced unification of diverse people within a singular nation, well, then we have a far weaker argument against a one-world government, quite honestly. It's already done by people, and it doesn't maintain this diversity. It's saying that anyone can be anywhere in the world, a member of any group or nation, so why not let all people of all nations decide your future? When we're all connected, even by exclusively legal means, the whole world already has interest in your future. And I know at this point it might sound harsh, this talking about revelations and pointing out how it's a malicious trick of all races and languages of people reunified on earth through the beast, but there is actually some good news, and it's also in Revelations here. Going back to Revelation 7:9, reading for a vision of heaven. Revelation 7:9. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. So I've highlighted again, and this time we have again 4 words to describe these now unified people: nation, tribe, people, and language. And for Wycliffe, it's folks, lineages, peoples, and languages. So again, we're talking about all races being united. And if we compare to Revelation 13 directly, and we have a direct parallel of these four words. But the crucial difference is that when all of these groups are united in heaven, it's something that's actually beautiful, and it's done by the will of God here. But when all of these same varied groups are united on earth, it's the will of the beast, and the goal of doing this is actually evil. Just consider this parallel in classic artwork such as the Sistine Chapel here. For the composition of this image, you have heaven above and earth below. Christian interpretation during this era was, I'd say, far more realistic when it comes to human nature. The unification of people in heaven is something completely different from this brutal reality of people on earth. See all that suffering below in contrast to the peace and unity of heaven. I would definitely recommend seeing many Italian churches. You'll see a lot of cruelty, a lot of martyrdom, and that's because it is reality. Revelation 7:10, and they cried out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." And for Bible reading, I conclude with this verse because this is where reunification has occurred. We've talked extensively so far about separation and reunification of vastly different people. In this verse, it's repeated again that salvation belongs to our God. We as people, we as the government, simply cannot and should not force people together who have been separated on purpose, as the Bible explains quite clearly. We are not the salvation of this world. We don't have all the solutions. We can't solve all these problems. So really, if you consider what unknown future unification of Psalms we should expect, that time in the future to be one in heaven and not earth. With the contrast being that when it's unification on earth through human means, that it's in fact a trick, and it's something that we're not actually supposed to be doing. And to really drive this point home, I just have to say many of the people that you would see as enemies to your way of life seem to understand this. Take, for example, the words of Moses Hess from a communist confession of faith. He says, "The Christian imagines the better future of the human species in the image of heavenly joy. We, on the other hand, will have this heaven on earth." And Moses Hess generally developed socialist philosophies and was a French Jewish philosopher and founder of labor Zionism. He also said this in Rome and Jerusalem. So for many Christians, I just want to say that your enemies understand. They will use every weakness that you decide to take on in order to create their utopia, their heaven on earth, if they put it that way. They want to build this perfect world that they see, and you're in the way of it. Of course, it didn't work before, but resulted in the deaths of millions, if you look at every single communist society, and all the targeting of Christians that they've done. It would be far better to accept reality as it is rather than trying to create this heaven on earth. And many Christians have, unfortunately, at this point, been tricked into thinking that they can create the better future of the human species within their own power, when the results are currently more suffering, more violence, and a lack of cohesion to form resistance. Your enemies have understood this strategy for decades, and I need to ask, why don't you? Now, last segment, I want to connect back to America because America did do a lot to lead the way in modern multiracial societies. So from here, I want to think about all the Bible verses we've read and have a hard look at what a segregated nation was and how it compares to the separation of languages and lineages for nations within biblical times. You've all probably seen this image of a segregated water fountain. I remember I had it in a history book. That was when I was pretty young and impressionable, long before I understood renovation or taxes. I'm looking at this image now, older and working, and I do see a couple things wrong, but nothing that's hurting me emotionally. There's the original water fountain on the left, then there's one made as an add-on. Mind you though, if we're looking at a public fountain in a formerly all-white space, this would be an add-on primarily paid by the white taxpayers and by that white majority. And in that way, it is stupid. It's stupid to see this waste of money, and at the same time, the water is running through the exact same pipes. For me, it's a great representation, not of independence or separation, but of a asked for dependency. In looking up these images of segregation, I was actually really surprised now. All of these images are taken from Ranker's, quote, 20 sobering photos of segregation at work in the 20th century. So this isn't me just selecting the most peaceful segregation pictures. This is a left-wing media outlet's selection of the worst they could find during segregation. And I will say, I was really surprised by how not sobering these images are when all accounted for and considered within a modern context. Here's another. This is one also of water fountains for the public, but here's what happened when they were made the exact same time. They share the same water, and they are the exact same model. Actually, in this image, the colored fountain looks a little bit better maintained. It could be the shadow within this picture, but it looks less scuffed and less water splatter. So if we can either say more white people using the same model fountain, but we don't have an additional fountain for this higher percentage of white people, or black people were better water drinkers. Now here's another one, again all from Ranker. We have a publicly available water right there, and I don't see the white alternative. Unsure where it is. Are the white people getting shafted within this picture? More likely it's just nearby and could be a better location possibly, but I'm guessing it's really close. And I'll say first, because we don't have another picture of this with a different angle, it's a pretty tight shot relatively speaking. And second, because this building seems to be actually pretty integrated already. If you see the bathroom signs, we have both races going into the same bathrooms, and they should be just normal bathrooms, especially since it is much harder to add toilets than drinking fountains. So if this image is so segregated, I'm supposed to believe that men are peeing together, but it's still sobering and horrible segregation. So if I take away anything in particular, a lot of these images help us to see that trying to create new boundaries within communities that were already self-sufficient was not easy and very confusing, poorly made rules. It certainly does not help to have convoluted laws like that. In this image, we have the colored waiting room for a bus. Shaded and a nice clean vehicle there. It is fairly small, but doesn't look like it will fill up because we have a smaller population waiting for this bus. We also have posters, which since they're placed, they're advertising primarily to this particular community. On top, you have Bingo Tonight, does sound wholesome. You have housing offers. And under that, you have Hitler's Love Life. I can't tell because of the shadow if this man is interested in learning about that movie or about the poster below. Up to you. Here we're still in the same list from Ranker, and this especially surprised me because we're looking at a white waiting room. They selected, if you see the sign in the back. You know, when I compare these directly to the black waiting room, it looks nicer to be in, the black one that is. This one looks packed with people all close together. There's way more people out there than just one bus arriving. So looks like many of them are in less shade for longer while they wait to get on different buses. What is this exactly supposed to make me feel about segregation then? That spaces were more cramped? Maybe with more and more people sharing the space as years went by. Then we have this picture. They're playing checkers, peaceful, all clean clothes, sheltered building. I will say these men don't have a proper table, but they're making do right now. This is segregated housing in Albany, Georgia. So what am I supposed to be offended by? Three men are all enjoying their games. They have bars on the window. But there's just bars in cities now. That's just how you have to build defensively when you react to whatever community you are in. And now we have a picture of a segregated part of town, here being the black part of town. That's why you have this Hotel Clark with its best service for colored only. So are you offended by this? By black businesses and black communities being by them and for them? And something that hit me quickly is that I'm looking at this and it looks nicer than a lot of areas in modern cities I've been to. We've got the character of a couple small businesses, very clean streets, no trash, nice brickwork for Hotel Clark, meaning it's pretty new and well cared for. And we also have all these cars lined up on the street, meaning that it's probably a pretty active part of the city. But we don't have any homeless, we don't have any people that seem to have nowhere to go. It looks more just like a stable community. And all of this wouldn't be a big deal, just selecting some images, but since I'm pulling these well-known images of segregation, we're just looking at the worst that was photographed. Keep in mind too that there were activists at that time. They did want desegregation, and these photos helped in their case. But let's just compare. Was it really oppressive for different races to have their own communities that they were responsible for? If black people can make and maintain nice communities back then, what can we see now? If these images we've looked over were an exhibition of suffering for black communities due to segregation, we should be able to see modern communities doing better now that we've integrated, right? Otherwise, separation, preferably with more independence, just like was specified in the Bible and worked to build up nations throughout history, did work. Not integration, not diversity forced by people in ivory towers. I think somewhere in your mind, though, you already know that answer. I think you already know I can pull up sadder or modern images, but I don't even want to be particularly selective about it, because I don't want to just cherry pick and go for photo opportunities like the selected segregation images. I'm only going to show you some stuff that I'm looking up on Google Maps, just whatever happens to be there on an average day when the Google car goes by. Okay, pulling some images. We got Chicago, Illinois, a modern liquor store right next to a church there, older cars, you can see some of the rust and scuffing marks, and the people don't really know where to go. You've got worn down buildings. Seems like the shop's still trying to stay open. Good on them for trying to stay open, but yeah, that's seen some wear and tear. Okay, we've got trash everywhere. You're still in Chicago. This is more backyard. Got water damage, just old, broken down, boarded up. And this is still residential. People are still living here. This is just how it is right now. It hasn't been taken care of. And again, trash all on the road. This is from New York. We got Food Dynasty on Malcolm X, China Walk restaurant. You do have homeless there. They're turning in some cans and stuff. And yeah, a lot of people just wandering around. Not much place to go, kind of waiting for something somewhere. Does this look nicer? And the buildings in the back too. You can tell a lot of these types of buildings, they've just gotten worse and worse to live in, more miserable to live in. And that's mainly the fault of the designers, I'd say. Yeah, selling on the road, broken down building. See the back of some other building, some homeless. Yeah, because if you can't have your private business anymore, what else are you gonna do? You gotta sell on the road. Are you good? It's from Atlanta, Georgia. Family Food Mart, as well as look at how heavy those bars are. Store, can't tell if it's open or closed, given how darkened it is. I guess it's got plastic on the windows. More disrepair. Okay, this is a good one. This is from New York. Some of the more public housing areas. So you got some trash in there. This is from New York. You've got some trash on the ground. And you've got, again, these bad modern buildings, not well designed. They're miserable to live in. They're small windows, tight, dark, barred up on the lower floors. Fences, and I wonder why the cops are parked out there. Oh, this is a good message in Chicago for a black community. You've got a nice community garden for love, peace, unity, community, and rage, with the biggest sign being rage. Just, remind the children as they're walking on their way to school that rage is the most important part of this love and this peace and unity. And here we're still in Chicago. This is actually right around the corner, pretty close. And I would say these buildings are all closed down, but then you just got a guy sitting out on the doorstep. What you gonna do? And I will say, I know Appalachia pretty well. I've driven around West Virginia, all these areas, and poor white communities, they do have it worse in a lot of ways. They're receiving less funding, and their buildings can be a lot more rundown. I'll show you some clips right here, just for comparison. So a lot of this is a aspect of just modern economics, modern situations as they are, but the difference can be pretty clear sometimes. It's pretty clear that right now we have all these black communities and the white communities too, with these broken down buildings that people aren't caring for in the same way. And it really speaks to me, at least, in a breakdown of communities. And that'd be the thing that I'd really point at in particular, if you read into Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, you might get an idea too of how much communities have been broken down. And that's really an essential problem. As well as we can bring up this graph that I was looking at before, but more briefly. And for this, you'll see that Steven Pinker is pointing out this spiking in crime after desegregation, though he's not specifically pointing out after desegregation. You do have that significant crime before, but ultimately the results of these laws, it's for one reason or another, probably compounding of many reasons. You have breakdowns of different communities, and we're not seeing improvements. I need to stress this, that it's not better for people now in cities, seemingly for anyone. We're looking at Black Wall Street in Tulsa, black businesses for black people, and just going to throw out a theory here that when any community is homogenous racially and culturally, they have a reason to care about their buildings, their public spaces, their community, and their trash. But in modern cities, these communities don't own these spaces, and they don't know who owns it. And it's not built by the community, it's just given to them. Someone else cleans the streets. If you trash the space, someone will clean it up until it's too late. That's what I'm seeing currently in cities. In our modern multicultural cities, people don't feel at home. And this is pretty well tested. And they don't have a reason to take personal responsibility for their spaces, because this is not their culture, not their family, it's not their neighbors, and not their home. So just look how much what we just saw contrasted Black Wall Street. But Black Wall Street is gone. There's still a realistic possibility of bringing it back, but inevitably now you would have the competition of other ethnic groups and international businesses. So I don't think it's coming back in a real way, even given money. I don't think that it has the separation or the will currently that it really needed to be built up in the first place. So what do you honestly think? You as a Christian, has a multiracial society been made for Christian reasons? Has it made more peace than having separation? Has it made your family safer, healthier, and strengthened your church or community? Has it made everyone into a good Samaritan? Is the goal of many races sharing one nation in any way the command to Christians while on earth, let alone the secular governments that most force this integration regardless of how it weakens your population? If integration does have largely negative consequences in our modern life, and if we're told in the Bible over and over again that when all races and languages are unified on earth, that it is negative while God sets up boundaries by lineages, then why should we not see the integration that our governments desire as evil and for their own benefit? I could talk for days on this and other deception, lies of omission, and definition changes brought into the church. So subscribe if you would like, and I have a lot of big plans hopefully. So that's all for now.